So kia ora peeps, we are live on LinkedIn. That's the theory. And joining me this week on PFPTV is Katie Patrick. Hello, Katie. I guess I normally just start off by asking, well, who are you? What do you do? Where are you from? Let's just go there.
All right, so you're not going to introduce me? Usually people have the, and this is so-and-so.
No, it's way more fun. Yeah. It's way more fun because, you know who you are more than I know who you are. So who are you? What do you do?
Who am I? Okay, well, my name's Katie Patrick. I'm an environmental engineer and a designer, and I specialize in behavioral psychology and gamification of environmental data. So I look at environmental data like forest data, energy data, carbon data, water data, pollution data, and I'm highly interested in the intersection between how we measure this data and then how we design it in a feedback loop type of way, kind of like a Fitbit. So you would see the data and then you'd be like, oh my God, look, I'm producing more trash than other people. I better do something about it. So it's really this intersection between the design of data and the behavioral interface design. And both those two areas are quite complex and deep things to understand. There's a lot of theory behind it, a lot of computer science on the data side, and a lot of psychological theories on the behavioral side. So I bring those two things together, which I think is a truly magical, wonderful place to look at sustainability through. And I have my book, How to Save the World, which is about that. And there's plenty of other stuff about me, but that's my starter intro of myself, because Tim introduced me, so I had to make me do it all on my own.
So how did you get into that? I mean, I can't imagine, because you're originally from Australia, you're living in the US right now, although we were just sort of talking in the pre-room that you've been in Costa Rica for the last 4 months. I can't imagine, because I think we're roughly probably about the same age. I mean, there certainly wasn't an A-level course in the UK on, environmental data and behavioural change type topics. So how have you brought all that together? Did you train in that, or have you kind of created this idea?
Well, from what I can see, I'm the only person that I know of in the world who explicitly kind of puts themselves out there as the design of environmental feedback loops. Like, I had to come up with this phrase, Fitbit for the planet designer. Like, a lot of people are using Fitbit for the planet. That's not something like I invented. It's kind of been going around. But I've just adopted that as calling it this type of design because it's a bit more specific than just saying I do like app design or I'm just a user interface designer. It's very much around the data. And no, it's a very nascent space. I do feel kind of like I'm the only one who specializes in it. Although other people do study it, they don't sort of perhaps go out and call themselves that publicly. They might call themselves, a research, or they might be doing research, or they might actually work in it, but they've got a different title in an organization. But the story of how I got here was just really layering on one domain of knowledge after another. So I started off as an environmental engineer. I was very passionate about sustainability, kind of came from a pretty deep kind of eco-activist space, wanted to save the earth and all that. But then, I really wanted to do it professionally. So then I worked in as a green building engineer, so on commercial buildings, very conservative kind of establishment. Big engineering and architecture companies are like that. But back then, that was in the early 2000s, really the only thing that you could do was really energy efficiency of office buildings. Like that was the job. Like, you would look at an architectural drawing and then you would sort of use some software to figure out how many kilowatt hours it used and maybe recommend like some light changes. Like, it was like the most boring thing I could ever imagine doing with my life. And back then there was like an architect called Ken Yang. He was like one of the first kind of biophilic architects to have a book out there. And I was just fascinated by the idea of like, eco cities, like trees on the tops of buildings and little like archways that would go from one building to another with like hanging gardens of Babylons and something really futuristic. I had this incredible vision in my mind, and the idea of just doing energy efficiency audits in like commercial, I was going to die, like no way. So then I started a media company because I really wanted to rebrand sustainability. So that took me into this very creative pathway. Well, not creative, it was really entrepreneurial, but it was essentially in the creative and in the media industry. So I was constantly producing content and kind of selling the vision of sustainability. But then everything started to go more sort of the Silicon Valley startup way. Facebook emerged, and then Twitter, and the startup and the social media thing was this big thing then. And media was naturally moving all digital. And so the natural way was to start, learning app design. What can we do with websites? What can we do with video? So I was moving into all that, and I started to really think about like, well, if I really want to start changing people, like that's what I'm here for, making videos and articles and blogs, like, I don't know if this is doing anything, like I really want to fundamentally change the numbers. And I started to really think about, it's kind of like from that Simon Sinek, that video that made him famous, the golden circle, which is why are you here? Why are you here? And I'm like, well, because I want to change the numbers. Like it has to, if it doesn't like actually like plant a tree or doesn't actually get a solar panel put on or save water, like I'm wasting my time here. So I really started to think about like, well, how can I like show the numbers to people? Can I like show the kilowatt hours on the wall or something? Or could you have a shower and it would show you like a little screen that told you like how many liters of water your shower had used? And I started to think through all of the different touch points in the engineering architecture of the modern world, in cars. Do they measure the cars? No. Does the car know how much fuel it's using at any time? If you do a trip and you drive for 15 minutes, does it tell you? I think the Prius might tell you, but I don't know. My car definitely doesn't tell me, just a regular Volkswagen. And then I just found that pretty mind-blowing. I was like, oh, my God, we do not have the data for all this stuff. It's not being collected. My wall does not show me the kilowatt hours or the CO2 I'm using. My shower doesn't. Nothing does, And the deeper I looked into this data infrastructure, I realized how much of it was missing from it just wasn't there. Like you could not get it. Some of it is there now. Some of it was there before. It's in PDF documents. They're like, sure, you can get that. Just download the Excel spreadsheet. If you're trying to build an app, downloading an Excel spreadsheet does not work. You need an API. You need a proper API. You can request and it updates in real time and you can code it into your app. And I realized that was missing. And that was really where I started to get very interested in this. And I started looking at the way games were developed and behavior design apps. I went to a game design startup once. And this woman said, you should be really looking at behavior change apps. And I'd never really thought about what behavior change was. And she's like, oh, there's this whole thing of like habit design and behavior change. I started looking that up in Amazon and looked at all these apps. And I was like, oh, this is like a whole like field of people that focus in behavior design apps and habit design. And then I realized this intersection between behavioral psychology, game design had a lot to offer, and getting this environmental data and designing around this feedback loops, was this intersection of these very fields that could have quite a magical potential. And there was quite a lot of academic research in the space that had not filtered outside of the academic world, as academic papers do often tend to just stay only with other academics. So I started finding more of these papers and revealing all these very fascinating insights that I felt I could bring to the world. And this has just fascinated me. So that's what I do. I find the insights, I bring them to the world. Hopefully I can share this knowledge, with people more and help inspire people to start thinking this way, because it's enormously powerful and has great capacity for change. All these things that are quite common in other industries. Like it's very novel in sustainability, but a lot of this stuff is very normal in other industries and they do it all the time, but we've been very slow to adopt it in sustainability.
So much goodness to unpack in there. I think, you were just bang on the money, because it's so hard to know. I think there's a lot of people, a lot of organizations who want to do more good, but they currently don't know how much good they're already doing. So it's hard for them to know, well, are we the good guys or the bad guys currently? And then in terms of that sort of impact measurement, impact assessment, what do we try and change? And are we actually getting meaningful outcomes that are making things better? Because it's really easy to think you're doing good, but actually be causing, I guess, as you'd say, unintended consequences in other areas. So I think that's a really, really crucial thing, is just helping people get clarity on, well, are we moving the numbers in the right direction? And yeah, you're right. I think historically sustainability has just been like either a dark pit of academia, people really, really deep in the data and the numbers, or it's like you were, well, we've swapped out the lights to LEDs and we've saved a kilowatt hour this year. Woo, we're going to save the planet. And it's kind of like, well, neither's working, clearly. So that's super cool that you've kind of created your own niche in that. It's super, super cool. So what does that look like today? What specifically are you doing? What sort of projects are you creating or working on right now that are sort of bringing this all to life?
Oh, well, one thing I'm really excited about is this startup I have called Energy Lollipop. And I got excited by this. It was about a year and a half ago. I was working on some software design to try and bring in more solar. It was a way of selling and sizing solar more efficiently and cheaply than it's done before. And all these people try to communicate energy and carbon in all these different ways. They were like, look at the ratio between like wind and gas and solar and coal. And why don't you show like how, just all these kind of like crazy numbers. And I was like, listen, you just need the CO2 that all the buildings, it needs to be one number, like just not how many megawatts of solar, just like the number, right? So it's like, well, let's just put the number of CO2 that the grid is putting out on a big screen and we'll make it big and round. It'll look like a lollipop on the street. And I got this idea because along the 101, when you're driving into San Francisco, there is a van. I think it's a combi van. I'm not sure what brand it is, but it's got Lyft. Like Uber. The other. Do you have Lyft?
Yeah.
You have it?
I don't think we have Lyft here, but we have Uber and some others. Yeah.
Oh, it's LYFT. It's like a direct competitor to Uber, and they have this giant truck like on a pole, and you can't miss it. It's their advertising. On the side of the freeway. And I'm like, why can Lyft put a giant truck on a pole that we can't miss, but I can't see the carbon dioxide emissions from my city on a screen? I can see the stock market. I can see the weather. There's so much data. There's so much advertising at me all the time. And why can't I see it anywhere? Why has nobody in this whole field of climate change figured out how to put the carbon dioxide on a screen so we can see it on the freeway or anywhere? And so I thought, I'm just going to make this happen. This is such a missing gap in our world. So I've purchased this screen. It's about a 1 meter diameter, big screen, and we've got the data feed. Luckily in California, we can get the data from the ISO, which is a electricity operating organization. And I'm going to tour it around California. It'll tell you what the CO2 emissions are at any point in real time, just like a Fitbit for the planet. I'm going to show everybody and see how they respond to it.
Nice. So you're going to like park it up in different locations and get the local feed from that location, or more generically like California feeds? Or
it will be only California, because we cannot get, nobody in the world can get the carbon emissions of their own neighborhood or town, which I think is a crisis and something I really want to work on. I've made a lot of inroads to talking to government and different utilities to try and figure out how to make this happen, but it's going to be quite a push. It'll probably take some legislation and be quite a big deal to get the electricity utilities to release. So you would be able to have like one number for your city or your town. We don't currently have that. And so part of this push with the Energy Lollipop is to start to advocate for that, because you're right, the first thing people will ask is, well, why does it say all of California, and why doesn't it say like my town that we're in right now? And it'd be like, well, let's lobby for that. Because it's exciting, because if you could get your own say if you lived in a smaller town, or if you're in a city, your own neighborhood, you could legitimately, with some work, really impact that number. Like you could see, the whole idea of the feedback loop is that you can see the result of your action in the number. And you could legitimately do that. You have some meetings, you work on it for 6 months, you meet once a month, you work with the schools and the churches and all the groups, and everybody's really into it. Groups of people when they're motivated can be very powerful. And seeing that feedback is a fundamental thing to human psychology to keep them motivated. So I think that this neighborhood score is could be enormously powerful with activating people. So
totally. Because I'm just thinking, with my kind of B Corp impact assessment hat on, you can, companies are asked, are you measuring your carbon footprint? And I think increasingly a lot of companies are thinking about their carbon footprint. And I guess even, on our power bill, because I work from my home office, on our power bill, I'm pretty sure that they'll say, this is your energy usage, give or take, this is kind of like your carbon emissions. So I guess there is a relatively analog way that you could maybe start collecting that, but you're not going to get that real-time data. And I guess it's a bit of a snapshot potentially, and it'll take a lot of legwork. But yeah, that would be super, super cool to be able to collect that. I mean, so I know like Christchurch City Council, where I'm based, they're really looking at this kind of stuff, climate commissions, and working out how do we. So I don't know if you're looking for other test places. Let's see if we can maybe get one going in New Zealand for you. Who knows?
I am. We might need to send it over though, because I don't think I'm allowed to visit New Zealand. No one's allowed in right now, are they? Well, I can lend it to you. You can borrow it.
I'm sure we could. Well, let's see what we can do.
Get someone to cover the shipping. Get someone to chip into the shipping and tour it around, and see what we can do.
I'll talk to my mate Scott Cotal, who's business development manager at Meridian Energy, who are all about renewable energy, and I don't know. We'll see if we can get something.
Where does the power come from in New Zealand?
So it's really interesting. So I think about 85% of it is classified as renewable. So we've got a lot of, I guess, old school hydroelectric that was built, some of it sort of like 100 years ago, give or take. And then we've got quite a bit of wind power. And then the remainder is coal and other bad fuels. So we said about general grid is about 86, I think, % renewable. So we're not bad.
Well, that's good. So your energy lollipop might only show like a little bit of numbers, but we still have to get rid of the last little bad bit.
Yep. Yeah. So you sort of said you started out as a bit of an activist, environmentalist from an early. Was that from like a super early age, or did you kind of go a bit through the corporate mill and then kind of go, actually, I want to be more of an environmentalist, or has this been like from day one, you've just been all about saving the planet?
Yeah, kind of. It started pretty early. I mean, I spent my childhood being very invested in art. My grandparents were sort of masterful artists. My grandfather was a graphic designer. That was before you had computers and you actually had to be able to paint a billboard by hand with perfect fonts and perfectly photorealistic pictures. They had to actually be really good artists. And my grandmother was a fashion designer where you had to draw everything yourself. Yeah. So I got kind of brought up in this very, and my mother also, was, she didn't have like a job as an artist, but the primary home culture was that of being a good technical artist. But in that, I just remember all of the messaging that was around that time. I mean, I was born in 1980. So, we had a lot of very strong environmental messages then. There was, stuff about like anti-nuclear, do you remember the Mururoa Atoll? Like that would have been big in New Zealand as well. There was a huge campaign from Greenpeace about the Mururoa Atoll. Like I was 14 when that happened. There was a lot of stuff about whales, pictures of whales being harpooned by Japan on the news. That was very upsetting. We had all of the famines. There was a lot of marketing for the skeletal children from the famines in Africa. Very upsetting. Wanted to help. So I was just as a child, very affected by that. So my earliest, kind of like career thoughts at being 12 or 13, when I kind of got over the idea I would be an artist, it was all, kind of about the planet, and it always has been. But also, I'm always, there's one side of me that's deeply in sort of the arts and creative and culture and pop culture, and the other half is kind of like deep in sustainability.
It's interesting. You got that mix of sort of science, environmental engineering, and what have you, but the creative, the art. I mean, that's quite a unique skill set because generally people are normally, they're arty or they're sciencey, but you seem to have got a mix of that. Have you cultured that, do you think, or is that just you?
No, that's just very much me. And it's like a difficult thing if you are like one of those people like me who you are kind of like equally split on both sides. It's a challenge to find a place for yourself in the world, because the world isn't really built for people like us. It's, if I'm only doing technical work, like I'm working as like a computer programmer or engineer, I just feel a complete spiritual death that I'm not doing what I was here for. And if I'm just hanging out with designers and designing stuff, I feel an equal sense of intellectual death that I'm not really using my mind properly. So each of these places are these feelings of feeling like it's not right for me, at a really deep level. So I really had to push very fiercely to find this new path for myself. I said this kind of like Fitbit for the Planet designer path is unique, because I had to really, really push at a sort of a really deep level inside myself to find where I would fit in the world, where I could be doing both things simultaneously, the computer science of sustainability and also the design interfaces, where I am doing both these parts of myself at the same time, which is the only place that I'm really going to be happy. We all kind of end up as, I suppose, user interface designers or founders or data visualization people, people like me.
We've got a question from Pete Leach, but I'll get to that in a second. So I just want to dive a little bit more into this, because I think this is with my kind of purpose hat on. This is a really critical thing, like following the calling that you are feeling compelled to follow, and navigating the path. There might be many people like you who haven't had that courage or ability, or I guess the true connection to who they could be, who are stuck, still in that engineering office, doing slight tinkerings to energy usage on big buildings, who have a deeply creative side of them that they can't express. I think it's just want to acknowledge that it's really cool that you've had the ability, I guess. And did you have to fight for that, or did you feel that you were in a position where you could kind of follow your calling and create something for yourself? Or did you have to kind of really fight for that?
Well, I mean, I just first want to say that I think, I write about this in my book, and it's become a real pillar of the way I live my life, which is that I think you need to put your creative genius zone, whatever that is for you, and even if you don't know what it is, you just need to try to figure out what it is, put that at the center of your life's work, and make it like going to the gym, like every day. And I do it through just asking these, what I call these big, like, wonder questions, which is a phrase I borrowed from someone else. Where you just say, like, what is the most creative thing I can do right now that's like for the greatest good of the universe? And just see what comes to you. I don't know. I have a lot of stuff that comes to me when I ask that really open kind of question. And I think, if you sit on that question for long enough, something will come to you. And so I just try to spend, like sometimes you're just walking out the street and then you'll be like, what is the most creative thing I need to do? Well, I think I just really need to look up green walls today on Instagram, and I need to make a collection of green wall pictures, because that's what it is for me today, And then, that leads to one thing, and then you meet someone and then you learn something, and you're just kind of like making sure you're investing in that flow every day. Yep. I think that's just like a fundamental thing we all need to do, so you don't end up eroding that, kind of having it's like a cancer instead of a fertile growth, But with me, like people often say, they're like, oh, you're so strong, you're so confident. Like, it's completely not true. I've gone so deep into this space now, not because was courageous. It was because I was lost. I came to Silicon Valley. I didn't have the confidence to be a technology entrepreneur in the bro tech VC scene. I just was overwhelmed with anxiety. I was in the scene, but I wasn't like turning up at VC being like, give me $3 million and here's my pitch deck. And I was just too shy, and I just wasn't feeling it. And I was just really, I just didn't know what to do. I'd broken up with my fiance of 4 years. I was in my mid 30s. Like, I wasn't in my home of Australia where I grew up. But I knew that I had to go forward. Like, you can't just go back. You have to keep, what they say, the only way out is through. And the only way that I could find through this period in my life was to just dig into my creativity. I was so anxious. Like, I didn't feel that I'd found it yet. And so I was just like, just do creative flow every day. And that's what I started doing. It was about 7 years ago. And I would just be like, well, today I'm going to just design a game. So what I'm going to do is design a game. Yep. Today I'm just going to write an article. Today I'm going to make a video. Fuck it, I'll just do a podcast. What am I interested in today? I'm just going to read some academic papers. And I just started scurrying and digging until it kind of started to form. Nice.
There's so much gold in that, because when I'm doing purpose coaching with people, there's so many great concepts. It's like from the Knights of the Round Table kind of ethos. You must enter the forest where it looks darkest to you. You kind of have to go into some tough times to find out who you really are, so that you can become who you could become. But also linked to that, I think, is you have been born, and the chances of you being born as you are so infinitesimally small that you should not actually exist. So it's like, you've been put here for a reason. What is that reason? And I think, the fact that you were able to connect to that and go, it's not mucking around with LEDs. I'm going to keep picking on that. I'm not here to muck around with LEDs on a building design. That actually, when the fundamental design of the building is what needs to change. And You're so right. You know, if you lean into that curiosity, I'm a big fan of sort of Jungian psychology and the whole idea of, you know, what is curiosity? Why do we have curiosity? Because if you think there's a guy, I can't remember his name, but he's done a whole lot of research on sleep. And, you know, the fact that humans sleep for 6 to 8 hours every day defies evolutionary principles, because to put yourself in a position of complete insecurity for 8 hours when theoretically any predator can come and eat you doesn't make sense. So what his theory is that sleep must therefore be the most important thing for a human for long-term survival, because that trumps you not sleeping and being safe. And I think when you think about curiosity, like again, on an evolutionary perspective, if you're too curious, you end up falling over the cliff edge, or you stand in the middle of the road and go, well, does a car actually hit me if it runs into me? I want to know. But that element of curiosity, I think, is part of that deep evolutionary need for you to work out who you should be. And following that, you know, following the curiosity, following the ideas that pop up is a really, really key part of the journey that I take people on when they're looking for more meaning and purpose in their life. Because I guess, to paraphrase Jung, you know, the thing that you're drawn towards is, his theory was, it's the best potential version of you calling you towards itself. And I think you have just epitomized that. It's like you felt compelled and drawn that there was something bigger that you could connect into that could create so much more contribution and good. And I think you're just a living, breathing example of it.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I have a video that I made about this, which is about that, you know, the kind of like the universe is expanding since it started to begin, you know, billions of years ago. And if you see this kind of evolution of the universe, even before life, like all of the atoms and all of the forces of the universe were evolving even before life started. And that we're kind of just like part of that flow. And the universe, one thing that is consistent about the universe, that it's always evolving and becoming more complex. It's becoming more artful. All of the creatures, you know, that we have now are much more complex than they were, you know, millions of years ago. And that, you know, we're just kind of part of this incarnation of that flow. And to see bring it back to like basic sustainability day to day, like sustainability is not like we're fighting the system. Oh, we have to like clean up, you know. You take a completely different paradigm to that and be like, well, how do you continue the flow of the universe? How do you serve the flow of the universe in your greatest sense of creativity and innovation and joy? What can you create that's wonderful and channel that through you? It's a completely different paradigm to come from. Very happy, wonderful space.
Yes.
When they're like, oh, we have to stop that, and those people are bad, and that kind of like, you know, who's got energy for that, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's what I love about your vibe and your book in particular. You know, it's because I think historically sustainability has been that. It's been the slap on the hand, no, stop doing that, no fun, you know, don't do anything, everyone just stay at home, don't breathe, you know, we're all destroying the planet, you know, don't have kids, we're all destroying the planet. Whereas I think that's and it's something that I've struggled with. And when I first was kind of went out on my own and was trying to work out like, how do I save the world and what part can I play on that? In my initial branding, I called myself a professional agitator, and it was like, I want to get in there and like, you know, dig in people's ribs and go, come on, why are you being such a dick? Like, wake up, man! Like you're the problem. And massive thanks to a good mate of mine, Michael Philpott. He was just like, dude, you just look like an angry guy shouting at people on the side of the street. No one wants to hang out with that guy. And
well, we all kind of started there, I think, in some way. You know?
I think we do, because you do get angry. I guess it's all part of that change process and almost like the grief process of like, oh my God, why can't everyone else see how ridiculous the whole thing is? You know, I've got a mate of mine on Facebook. He's all about, you know, the bullshit jobs, David Graeber, you know, kind of stuff. You know, why have we got 4.5 billion people doing jobs that are meaningless and, you know, aren't actually contributing to anything real and of value? And yeah, it's easy to attach to that and get quite angry and sort of feel like you've been duped and like, who's actually in charge of this show? Why are we all doing this? But you're right. And now I try and bring the energy, the happiness, the vibes. And it's like, actually, you know, purpose and saving the world can be the best party on the street. And we'll have a ton of fun and we'll save the planet instead of actually, you know, doing something mediocre over here and not having that much fun, really. So, yeah, I think you're just encapsulating so much goodness in all of that.
Oh, so thank you. And that way of getting sort of angry at other people, I mean, ultimately in your life, like, it's not about, you know, everybody else. Like, it's about just what you can do in your life. Like, humans do things by copying other humans. You have to become an example. like sometimes people poo-poo like individual behavior change, but really individual behavior change is a huge part of how everything changes. You can't get away from that. So basically, if you can channel your highest form of creativity and contribution and innovation in a way that inspires everybody around you, that's how you do it. Like being angry at other people, like that's a very primitive and annoying. Like, what are you contributing to the world, you know, by doing that? And you can motivate someone. Say if I wanted to get everybody in this apartment block to, I don't know, go plastic free or get an EV. Do you think if I went round, there's like 30 apartments here, if I went around to everybody and got really annoyed at all of them,
banging on the doors,
it was really negative and depressing, or I was really depressing, I said like, climate change is terrible, the earth is going to be on fire,
we're all going to die,
you know, like one of those like Jesus people on the street, you know, like this is, I just want to tell you how bad climate change is. I'm really worried, and it's really important that we all get electric cars now. There's only like 3 electric cars in the parking lot and all the other cars aren't. Like, I don't think that would be the best way to connect with people. You know, like I could connect, firstly, I got to get myself an electric car. I got to go plastic free. And then I just want to build relationships with people, be like, hey, you know, I'm doing this thing. I was thinking we could do this. You know, there's a whole lot of like psychological ways that are very friendly, very open. I would focus, you know, all based on building relationship and good vibes and social sharing and creating a new identity of adoption. It would have to be a really positive, thing in order for it to work.
Totally. Yeah, no, 100%. So we've got a question from the crowd. So Pete Leach, he has asked a question. Oh, I know what I can do. I can even, we can go better than that. We can put it on the screen for you. There we go. So have you seen the documentary Seaspiracy? If it's true, why aren't we focusing on saving our oceans? So thoughts on that?
It's not a good question for me because I haven't seen it, and also because I don't work on oceans, so I don't know that much about them.
There we go. Dodge like a true politician.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Pete. I don't know, but all I can say is from my own self why I don't work on oceans. Well, I don't like the beach that much. A bit more of a forest.
So if the beaches go, Katie's okay.
A bit more of a forest girl. A bit more of a forest girl than a beach girl. But I mean, I think though that one thing that humans have been doing very well at, to give a decent answer, is decarbonizing the electricity grid. And I've been drawn to the electricity grid as well because kilowatt hours are really easy to measure. Like most places can measure kilowatt hours. The sensors are kind of pretty well made. You can do it. And then the mechanisms to doing that is like solar, wind energy, closing power stations. That's something everyone can get into. It's kind of like a machine that we can all tinker at. Whereas other issues like agriculture, the ocean, forestry, these are harder things to measure and harder things to activate people on. So I think the movement has been slower in those because they're not just like a nice clean machine like the electricity grid.
Yeah. And I guess it's I mean, I have seen Seaspiracy. In the LinkedIn comments, I've tagged Bubba Cook, who is sort of working with the Marine Stewardship Council and WWF on a lot of sea stuff. I think like a lot of environmental challenges, it's big, it's complex, and there are no easy, quick wins. You know, in terms of fishing, you know, theoretically, you can make the argument that sending one massive trawler that goes and gets a whole lot of fish in some ways is more efficient and less environmentally damaging than having 1,000 small one-man fishing boats go out. You know, there is again, but it's like, there's good and there's bad, because that means, well, there's one trawler, which means there's now 100 or 1,000 guys who don't get to go and fish, which means they don't kind of have a job, which means they're not contributing to their local village or town. So it's really, really, really complex. I think where I got to, I had a bit of an email exchange with Bubba, and I was kind of like, is really the best thing kind of just to buy local and buy in season? And he's like, yeah. I mean, if tuna is a non-native fish to your city, maybe you just don't have it so much, because you know the environmental footprint of getting tuna to a landlocked city in the middle of the continental US, you know, it's kind of not meant to be there. You know, what's the local fish that you could get, or you know, pick something else. So yeah, Seaspiracy, I don't know, there's been some interesting, some people say it's a complete sham, some people are saying no, it's pretty accurate, but there was just some stats that they kind of overinflated. But I think this is why what you're doing, Katie, is so important. It's like, let's actually get the data, but let's get the right data, and then let's work out if we change this, what happens on the other end. And I think, like you say, we've had so little of that, or we've had it, but it's been hard to find.
Yeah, well, I'm always on about causality, but I mean, just to, like, I mean, I wouldn't know. I don't know if there is any way to really measure fish. You know, they can measure fishing boat activity, but you know, some things. That's why I said the electricity grid's really easy to measure. So that's why it sort of gets a lot of people work on that. Whereas you know, the oceans, I mean, it's a hard thing to measure. You can't get that immediate feedback loop. You can't make a change and be like, look, we did it. We got 10% down. You know, these are very challenging systems to work on. But I mean, I don't understand why everybody is still hooked on eating animals so much. Like, we've really got to get over this. Like, I mean, I eat a mostly vegan diet. I'm not one of those like extreme, what do you call them, crazy extreme vegan types. But I do think everybody's got to go, like, there shouldn't be any excuse for not being like 80 or 90% plant-based, at least. Like, everybody can do that. And if you really love meat and you want to eat it like once a week or once a month. But the bulk of the diet should really be made of plants and not animals and not fish. You know, so we just eat too much of it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Listen, because as part of I co-teach an MBA program at the local university here in Canterbury on creating impact-led enterprises. And it's really interesting when you get down to like why in particular kind of sushi kicked off. And I think it was tuna in general. I'm pretty sure Bubble can fact check this. Like tuna was a really poor man's fish in Japan, and I think it was sometime in the 80s someone kind of figured, hey, we can probably package this and sell this, and they kind of created the modern sushi box idea, and it just exploded in the US and the rest of sort of Asia. And so suddenly tuna just sort of became sushi and tuna became a thing, whereas before it hadn't become a thing. So yeah, it's interesting how, I guess, marketing and consumerism can drive trends which create massive negative externalities based on a whim.
Well, they can start making the imitation sushi. You can get it now. It's like plant-based sort of.
Like Impossible meats and.
Yeah, they've got like impossible sushi. Now it's time to do the marketing and to spread and take over.
So is that because obviously they're all California-based companies, aren't they? Impossible meat. Is that?
No, I don't know.
I'm pretty sure they're West Coast.
No,
is that easy to find in the States?
Yeah, there's a lot of it. Totally. You go to Trader Joe's, Safeway. There's a huge refrigerator full of frozen fake meat. There's a lot of variety of fake meat. I personally am an enormous fan of fake meat, having been a vegan leaning person since I was 12 years old, and it's made a total difference. I can eat all of the standard American food now with the fake meat and the fake cheese. It's great. And
it tastes good?
Yeah, I think it does.
It's interesting. Yeah, because I mean, over here you can see a couple of there's increasingly more. So I'm trying to totally on sort of the 80% vegetarian. So we've got like this like a meat-free burger patty, which is like quinoa and chickpea, like little patty, tastes pretty good. There's a local mushroom company that's kind of really trying to get into like mushroom-based burgers. So it's like a lot of mushroom with some lentils and beans in it. Some hemp burgers. Yeah, there's some stuff coming through, but the fake meat stuff. I think there's a chicken-based brand in New Zealand. Haven't tried that one yet. I'd say it's getting here. What's interesting, there's quite a big, I guess a lot of people would call them a dairy company based in Canterbury called Synlait, who are a B corporation. But what's really interesting is they're now branding themselves as a milk company, not a dairy company, because they're kind of recognizing that bovine milk might not be the future. So it might be another form of nut milk. So yeah, I think that's because New Zealand's, our certainly top 2 exporter is milk-based dairy, like bovine dairy products. So it's a real area of contention, which we will try not to open up, and you won't have much to comment on anyway. I wouldn't imagine on the New Zealand dairy industry. But yes, it's interesting to see how we might need to transition locally here from one of our big export products.
Well, I think it's very exciting that a dairy company is now identifying as a meat company, because that's a very bold thing for a company to do that's always done things a certain way. That's a complete 100% change in every single process. And most of them seem to not want to do that. They want to kind of
stick
protect
with
their, or a lot of these are just owned by big corporations. So, you know, like, I mean, Silk is an Almond Breeze, are like the really big supermarket brands of non-dairy milk here, and they're all just owned by the same enormous corporations that own like hundreds of brands. So they'll own dairy brands, they'll own nut milk brands and oat milk brands and vegan brands and meat brands, and they're just one of many brands. So I don't know, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I mean, getting companies to choose, you know, to realize what they're actually trying to provide for people rather than the mechanism, good for them. Hopefully it works out.
Yeah, no, big shouts to Hamish Reed, the Director of Sustainability. He gave a talk at one of the lecture nights at UC and shared their kind of future plans for their sustainability, and it's truly phenomenal. Like, if they get even probably 20% of it's game-changing, next level kind of stuff. So yeah, I think this the thing is really, you know, but it's the same. This is why I think, you know, organizational purpose and doing good at an organizational level is the same as the individual. You can stay with the sunk costs of, well, I've trained to be an environmental engineer. I don't like my job. I realize that this is not the future. I realize that I'm not going to be happy here, but I'm so connected to the identity of me being an environmental engineer. And what would mum and dad say if I quit my job and moved to the States and wanted to start a tech company? You know, all of those thoughts are the same as what go through a senior leadership table. Well, you know, we've been this kind of company for 50 years, or, you know, worse, 200 years. And my great granddad, you know, was firm that we would have to stay doing this forever and ever and ever and ever. And, you know, it's that fine line between the sunk costs and you know, maximizing those versus, well, we have to change. I think the parallels are the same between organizations and people. You get stuck on the thing that you're doing and you can't see the wood for the trees as to what you could be.
Yeah, well, often like the world decides it for you, you know, like my media company in Sydney closed. I mean, two reasons. One, because the economy changed and it was not financially viable anymore, even though it had been a multi-million-dollar company for a few years. And two, because I was completely burned out. I was completely fried, and I needed to take a year off, a year of just really doing nothing. So it was kind of like, sometimes it's not that you decide, it's that the world, if you don't get it right, the world decides for you. You get sick or something will change. It kind of forces you to ultimately have that transition in your life.
100%. So I guess back to sort of the rest of the sort of work you're doing, what are the biggest mistakes that you see individuals or people trying to do good in small groups or even bigger organizations? Like, what's the big mistake most people are making?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm just going by the biggest mistake in my book, just because it's there and you can read about it quite easily, is the one thing I talk about, which is the value action gap, which really everybody, it's kind of a tragedy that it's not common knowledge. And I really think it really needs to be common knowledge, which is that we all make the assumption that if people just know about something, if you just know about climate change, if you just know about the oceans, if you just know about this, you know about that, then you will change. You'll just do everything differently. And humans don't work like that. Like, it's tested, it's been tested many times over. You take people, read a book, watch a documentary on climate change, follow their energy-related climate behaviors, and you won't see any effect. And it's very easy to test. They'll try putting out a whole bunch of different flyers. Researchers will make 5 different flyers, 5 different designs. They always use the like, I think they call it like the biospheric appeal is the psychologically technical term. The biospheric appeal means you should do this because the earth matters, because of climate change, because of the planet. The biospheric appeal in many studies I've read always gets 0 result. It's like nothing. Like, well, sometimes if you're asking someone to do something, you'll get like maybe 10% of people respond, but whether you put the biospheric call in there or not, it doesn't. It's just because you're asking somebody to, like, please don't litter because the earth matters, doesn't make any difference. And so we all make the mistake that going for this like call to the earth is strong. It's not. Like, I mean, we care, that's fine. It does lead to caring, but it doesn't lead to action. And action design, behavior design is a totally different profession to getting people to care. If your job is to getting people to keep them awake at night and cry about something, sure. But if your job is to actually get someone to put on a solar panel, change their EV, go plastic free, put in an environmental campaign in their policy, change a law, write to a politician, completely different style of designing to go about it. And so look up value action gap information deficit hypothesis. There's Wikipedia pages on it. You can read about it. Don't fall into the trap that getting people to care about the planet, getting people to know about the planet is going to lead to action. It doesn't go anywhere.
And then I guess, like, you know, within that, it's like, well, is writing to our politician the most effective tool? Like, if we've got 100 people who are suddenly activated, where do we go? Like, what's the big, you know, return on investment, I guess, for the time? Because I think this is, again, it's part of the challenge. People kind of might care, like you say, they might care if they kind of got to know about it a bit more, but then people are busy, they've got their own bullshit going on in their own lives, and all the rest of it. So actually making time to go and do something, you want to make sure that you're asking them to do something that's effective, that's going to actually get an outcome.
Yeah, well, so you need to really think about that. That's why sort of the book starts with looking at the data, looking at, you know, what's something that you want to work on, because every issue can be divided up into like 100 sub issues. So choose a sub issue. And the thing that really, the way to see change is to look at it through social connection. Everything is relationships. One thing is that people copy each other. So any way that you can create something that can get people to copy each other, it can be putting things on Instagram. Look, here, I'm doing my thing on Instagram. Oh, look, I'm doing it. You're getting people to mimic it. You know, you made posters and your graphic design and all of that. And the other one is copying each other. No, sorry, comparing to each other or competing with each other, which is saying, oh, this is how my data compares to everybody else. You know, if like 50 people in my community get this average, am I doing 20% worse or am I doing 20% better than everybody? It's called social comparison, social norms. And be like, oh, if I'm doing worse, I better do better. Everything is through the social lens. That is how people change. So before I was saying, like, what if I wanted to get everyone in my apartment block to do EVs? The first thing I would do is build a relationship with everybody, a human one-on-one relationship, and then start using some of these mechanisms like, well, do you know your car uses 20% more fuel, is 20% more polluting than the average car? And, you know, I got everyone's cars, and then I ranked their carbon emissions on a leaderboard. This is, you know, your car's actually kind of down the bottom, you know, maybe you could do this, maybe I could help, but it would be through the lens of the relationships with everybody else. And that's kind of like understanding one of the mechanisms for change. And also the reward center of the brain. People want to make an action, and then they want to see that the action works, which is the feedback. Like, I turn off my lights, then I get a text message that says, hey, your carbon emissions have been cut in half. Good job. Nice. You know, you're seeing that feedback. And so we want to see feedback for our action. So that's why things like fish in the sea are very difficult to attach to, because we can never really see them. We can't see whether they're doing well or not, you know. So I want to try and build where we can this idea of the reward system and the feedback, and giving us compliments and smiley faces and good job. Kind of into this
pat on the head.
Into this, and you can kind of like build that in, you know. And when you know what those things are, and I lay them out really clearly in my book, I think you can just put in some basic pillars of behavior design, so you know you really start to make progress.
Nice. There's a whole sub conversation happening in the comments about meatless meat, which is really cool. General consensus seems to be. So Steve was sort of saying, the guy Pat Brown from Impossible Meats says, you know, the ground product is going to reach a crossover with ground beef in the next few years. So essentially, his product will be dollar for dollar the same as a normal burger. Kieran was saying, because that's the problem with fake meat, because, you know, the social impact of if it's more expensive, it's maybe hard for someone in a lower socioeconomic bracket to get into this stuff. Steve's saying, he thinks Seaspiracy, some of them claims have been exaggerated. And Steve has just finished off by saying, when the Impossible product is as cheap as normal meat, things are really going to kick off, which is, I would imagine, is all true. I guess the other thing with fish, like, how do you actually count, to count the number of fish? Like, how do you not double count fish? It must be impossible. So, you know, you look at a shoal of fish that are, you know, moving around. It's like, there's definitely 1,500.
Maybe there's like some way that ocean ecologists do it, but I'm not even going to go there because I really don't know. I would have no idea what I'm talking about with that.
I'll give a shout out to my housemate from university, Ben Ralston, because this scared me, and it still scares me to a degree. So he was doing a zoology degree, and as part of his final year, he had to do an industry placement. And the industry placement he chose was with like a bug spray company. They sold like insect repellents and traps and stuff. And he was asked to do a study on to work out the average number of bugs in a house in the UK. And he basically didn't do any work on this. And the night before, you know, he had to come up with a number. He basically asked all of us in our flat in Cardiff, boys, how many flies have you seen this week? And I go, I don't know, 1. Anyway, he basically made up a number. And it got published as like a white paper through the company, and it was even reported in, dare I say it, the Daily Mail. And he came back just like, guys, I think I've made a bit of a boo-boo here. My work is now in the media. I just basically made it up. So
okay, well, I don't think it wasn't published in Nature Journal. It was just the Daily Mail, so we don't need to worry. We don't need to worry.
Yeah. So just I kind of feel that's maybe the same way that fish get counted. At least Ben's now policeman.
We don't want to insult any marine biologist by assuming that that's how they do it.
Totally. I mean, it must be. I'm just curious. Maybe Bubba, if you tuned into this, you can let us know how we actually count fish. Cool. So, biggest mistakes. What would be your other than obviously go and buy Keddy's book because it's amazing and it will answer all the questions that you have about doing more good more effectively and actually. I love how you on the front of your book you got how to make change in the world the greatest game we've ever played, and I kind of agree. You know, my background's in sales, and I sort of say, you know, trying to convince people to go to the path of purpose and doing more good is the biggest sales job I've ever had. You know, you've got to try and convince people that there's a better way of doing something when they're very, very fixed to the way they have been doing it. And I think the other big thing is that sense of identity that people attach to. Well, I am this, and if I have to now say that everything I've held to be true is not as true as I thought it would be, or as I thought it to be, that's quite confronting. So yeah, that's kind of my big sales job. But in terms of what would be the one thing you'd say to people who are wanting to maybe transition to do more good? Like if there's a environmental engineer sitting in a building still in Melbourne, crunching numbers on LEDs, what would be some advice to someone like that?
Well, I mean, just go through the steps in the book. I mean, my book is sort of laid out in this 10-step process that you can take anything, any branch of anything, if you want to work on forests or you know, coral, pollution, energy, buildings, cars, and just go through it. And it starts off with deeply looking into the numbers. You know, like most people don't take a really deep dive into the numbers, and nothing has helped my creative entrepreneurship like doing this. And the more I look into numbers, the more ideas I get. And then you just ask yourself, well, how would I change these numbers? Like recently I started mocking up some images of putting these lights on electric vehicle chargers that show a different color based on how sort of polluting the grid is at any time, right? And I've done a lot of these Photoshop mock-ups of even building applications, you know, real computer applications around this. And I never thought about car charging because I always, in my mind, I put cars in with transportation, and I was working on buildings and cars are transportation. So I just had a mental wall up, not thinking about cars. And then as I started to look in the data, like we started to get people's electricity data, started to put them in the application, was interviewing people, looking at them, and I'm like, oh, fuck, like, cars, electric vehicles create a lot of carbon, like not compared to the petrol ones, but if you don't own a car, you might have a reasonably small carbon footprint. You add an electric vehicle in there and it goes up, like, because people, and the reason it goes up is because people charge them at night in the evening when the CO2 is very high. And so, but by looking into the numbers that closely with that much granularity, I was like, oh my God, we need to start making these colored lights and working with electric vehicle charging companies. And I realized that none of the vehicle charging companies are really doing it, like the tiny little bit, but not much. Tesla doesn't seem to be doing it. There's this huge wave about to happen with electric vehicles, going to put all this load on the grid. It's going to get all this CO2 that it doesn't have to do because we've got plenty of solar here. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is crazy. This is this huge entrepreneurial opportunity. And like, anyway, point of the story is it came from looking into the numbers more deeply. How do we fix it? What's the idea? Just keep doing that. And then, you know, you can read the rest of the book to figure out different ways that you can augment that. But that's the primary sort of mechanism. And then looking at different ways to make the change fun and gamified, you know, progress bars, animal characters, color, all that.
Yep. Have you read a book called Influence by a gentleman called Robert Cialdini?
Yes, of course.
Good.
I've read all the behavior change books on Amazon.
Yeah, I bet you have, yeah. Because I remember, you know, one of the ones he talks about in his book is the in hotel rooms when people, you know, throw their towels to be cleaned every day, and I think it was the little paper or plastic reminder that they say they tested it, and one said, hey, you know, please consider the planet by not choosing to have your towels laundered every day. And it had very little change in people's behavior. And then they tested another one, which said something like 80% of people who stayed in this room chose to reuse their towels every day. Would you consider being one of them? And because people wanted to fit in with the crowd, they were like, oh, well, if most people don't wash them every day, I guess I should be the same. So, yeah, I think you're just at a really interesting intersection of data and humans, which is, it's kind of, it's so obvious that that's what we need, yet so few people are doing it, which kind of makes me think you're definitely on the right path.
Well, the thing is that I just learned it from other industries. Like they do it with health trackers, right? There's a whole field that works on this, you know? They do it with, you know, like when you're speeding and there's that sign on the side of the road that tells you how fast you're going. And if you're over the speed limit, it says slow down. I mean, they're doing it with cars on the side of the road. It's very simple technology. Like the stuff is about, it's just, you know, everybody who works in sustainability has come from environmental science or environmental law or environmental planning or architecture or electrical engineering. I mean, we do not learn anything, absolutely nothing about behavioral science or human influence or storytelling or sales. Like we just don't, it's not in our vernacular of study at all. Like even like the hero's journey. I mean, I was like in my 30s before I'd heard of the hero's journey of how to communicate properly. And I'd also spent 5 years running a media company doing professional sort of high quality level environmental communications. Like we're in a bubble. It's crazy. We have to get out of the bubble. Get out of the bubble.
Would you see yourself wanting to be involved with educating the next sort of generation? Like I could see that you could, I mean, I know you've got online training on your website, but I mean, really, because I think you're right, you know, cross silos, I guess, in terms of education and getting people thinking. I mean, I saw this, I spent 10 years selling medical devices and you'd be in a hospital and the neurosurgeons would actively seek to not connect with the orthopedic surgeons, yet they're both doing spinal surgery. One's coming at it from, you know, use of microscope and looking for the nerves. The other's coming at it from more of a mechanical orthopedic background. And you kind of go, well, if you two actually work together, you'd have the best outcome for the patient, because you're considering a breadth of issues through two different lenses, but with the shared vision of the best outcome. But the ego kind of all got in the way, and it's like, no, neurosurgeons shouldn't even be doing spinal surgery anyway. Rah, 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 rah. And the neurosurgeons say, oh, well, orthopedic surgeons, they're just carpenters. Rah, 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 rah. And it's like, well, you're not putting the patient priority here, are you? You're putting yourself and your own sort of pride. So yeah, would that be something that you'd like? I kind of feel like someone like you needs to be helping as many people as they can become like you.
Well, I don't know if people, there's a whole,
do we need more
dark
Katies
side.
In the world?
There's a whole dark side we don't want to get into.
No.
It all comes at a cost in some other sort of way. Life's not all perfect all the time. So no, we don't want everyone to be more like me. The world would become very dysfunctional very fast if that. There would be parking tickets all over the ground. There would be like things not lining up properly, dishes in the sink, unpaid. It would be really, yeah. We need all of the more like structured thinkers to balance out the people like me who are very like expansive sort of ideas people. But yeah, like I've got I would encourage everyone to sign up for my podcast, How to Save the World, because I have a really cool episode that I just edited that's coming out next month with a guy called Jesse Schell, who wrote a book called The Art of Game Design. And he just talks about this, like he's so eloquent and insightful into this one topic, which is bringing in different spheres of knowledge so you can innovate. Because if you think about one thing that is pure creative innovation, it's game design. And that's what I love about learning from this. Like the only thing they need to do is be awesomely creative. They literally don't have to do anything else but be cool and fun and engaging. And if they fail at that, they've failed at everything. So they just take it really seriously, obviously. Same with like film, you know, like it just has to be good, right? So, you know, this whole like really thinking deeply about how to be more creative, how to tell better stories, how to engage people, you know, is like central to the DNA of that craft. So he talks about that a lot. And you know what? In sustainability, we talk about it absolutely never, never, ever. So, you know, if you think about it, if your job is to like save forests or the whales or the trees, you know, think about it. If you were a great creative force, you know, how would you do it? You know, what could you learn from Hollywood style storytelling? What could you learn from game design? And you find that you can bring wonderful things into it that are really enriching, and it becomes a wonderful craft. as opposed to like a fight, So yeah, people just gotta like just really, just go to the complete opposite field, something that you never thought you'd be interested in, read about it, and then think like, how would I bring that back home? How would I bring this back to what I do? Even if you do something that would be considered boring, like insurance or policy. A lot of people work on local government policy, very important and influential space. Think about, what could you learn from, I was leading to a podcast just before we started this on sports psychology, right? Now I hate sport, never played sport. I hate everything about it. I cannot hate sport more than you can possibly hate sport.
Is that why did they deport you from Australia for being un-Australian and not liking sport?
No, I left. I don't like the beach. I don't like the sport, and I don't drink alcohol. So I'm very un-Australian. I don't
very
fit
un-Australian. Yeah,
people
clearly.
tease me all the time. I don't fit into the culture there. So but I was really curious about this. I'm like, okay, people are so into sport. It's crazy. Like, and I think it's dumb, like running around after a ball. Why would anybody want to do that? People seem to really like it. They've got a whole field of sports psychology, like maybe I should learn sports psychology and then figure out how to bring it into what we do. And they're very into like leadership and teams and all this nuance in their psychology. And we can really learn from that. So that's something that you could learn and then bring it back in. I mean, evolution only happens when fields intersect, when we're all just in our environmental science degrees, like, great, do we really need another environmental science degree just on its own? Do environmental science and do, I don't know, just do something crazy like performance art and put them together.
Yeah. So yeah, totally right. Because when you're kind of squeezing the lemon of the environmental science knowledge and you're getting down to the nth degree of one little topic that no one's read the 10 research papers that came before your one, which has taken this to the finest point of the wedge. It's like, yeah, totally agree. It's in the sports stuff. I think that's interesting. I think for me, I mean, I did play a lot of sport. I guess it's for me, I'd link it to that kind of hero's journey. It's that concept of living out the potential ideal of the hero, and getting to kind of figuratively, or if you played rugby, actually fight other people to test yourself for that kind of warrior archetype. So I think that's why so many people like watching sport, because it's like I'm sitting on my couch drinking beer, eating crap food, whilst watching some amazing athletes perform, and in my mind I'm telling myself I could have been that guy, but I just didn't get that lucky break at varsity or uni or school or whatever. And I think that's why, particularly for guys, it's such a massive, we're living vicariously through the heroes that we watch on the pitch, and then you chuck in a bit of sort of general machismo and nationalism on top of it, and it's like fantastic, everyone's a winner.
Yeah, I think, Ben, I asked once, I had a very insightful boyfriend once who worked in film, and I was like, why do men love to watch violent films? Like, I can't stand violence. Like, I just, not even for 1 second, I can't deal with it. And he said, all men have a deep kind of inner sort of genetic itch to be that guy, to fight. And we can't do it in our normal society. So we vicariously watch it. He's very articulate in the way he explained it. So we like to watch it because we get to live that. So when you think about, sport and violent films, I mean, women are not as much attracted to, it's not very cool to kind of divide men and women anymore, but there's one of those things that it's like, well, why are guys like so into sports, so into violent films? Because you get that sort of deeper sort of itch to fight kind of out.
I think it's genuinely, I think, you sort of ponder and you kind of go, well, if you look at the entirety of history, we've basically at some place, and if not all over the world, we've been trying to kill each other on a really regular basis. I mean,
humans have been very violent for a very long time.
Yeah. So to me, it would suggest that it is not that far beneath the surface. And I think if you look at most drunken towns on a Friday or Saturday night, it's at the surface. People just want to have a go at it. So I think for me, that's that is part of this kind of process that humanity needs to go through, is that raising of consciousness and realize that for me, saving the world, like that, the competition is not me versus you. It's you and me versus no planet. And I think that's all part of what you're doing. And hopefully what I'm trying to do is, help people raise that level of consciousness and realize that there's other battles that you can fight where we need that warrior kind of archetype, that warrior spirit. But instead of punching another bloke in the face, go and punch climate change in the face.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I personally don't relate to that at all. I'm not trying to punch anyone or fight anyone. I'm just perhaps the incarnation of my childhood, which is just drawing flowers. I just want to do like cool art that people like. And now my art is more technically based and kind of more behaviorally based, but it's still just kind of like cool stuff I want to make. But no, I have no desire to fight, to fight or attack. But yeah, maybe that's what everyone's sort of going through the process of every 100 years. There's this kind of like shedding of the old ways, and then emerging of a new style, new paradigm of being.
Yep, definitely. Well, we're at the just over the hour mark, and I know you've got to go and you've got to go pick up your daughter. I believe, is that what you're off to?
I will. Yes, I have to go and get her from school.
Very cool. Final words of wisdom for people listening in. I feel like, I mean, go buy your book. It seems would be the logical thing. But yeah, anything else you sort of want to think about, talk about before we close up the call?
Oh, anything that I think I've already talked about so much. You can't give people like these open-ended things. You have to ask like specific questions. Otherwise they're like, no, I just would like just people to, I've been putting out more material on Instagram, like designs and more podcasts. Got a couple of really interesting podcasts coming out on my Instagram. That's at Katie Patrick. Hello. And download the Energy Lollipop Chrome extension. It's for California, but you can see what happens to the grid in real time. And then possibly we can do it for other states and countries in the world, so you can sort of see a really good example of this Fitbit for the planet style of design. And I'm always pretty chatty on DMs, so people ask me questions, and I'm pretty friendly, like to hear from people. So
cool.
That's it.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, I'll put some links to your book, the Lollipop extension, Instagram, and your website on LinkedIn and on YouTube and on the podcast. But really great to see you again. It's been quite a while since we've connected. Great to see you doing well. Really excited to sort of see what happens for you in the next couple of years. And let's see if we can get your Lollipop to Christchurch.
I want to see that. I want to see that. Find someone who can sign off on a little bit of a budget. It doesn't need to be much. Someone who works in government who can sign up just a little check and then pay some postage, and we can send it down.
I reckon there'd be some funding places we could go to, or if not, some sponsorship opportunities.
And once they see it, they'll just be like, "That is so cool."
That's
we'll
awesome.
have like 20 of them all over the city. And you're a professional sales guy, so no one will sell it like you.
No pressure now.
Absolutely
no pressure now. Yeah. Awesome. Hey, well, thank you, Katie. Thank you, peoples of the interwebs. Thank you so much for everyone's questions today on the Seaspiracy. A lot of interest in fake meat. So I don't know. I'll see if I can get Bubba on one of these next up, or maybe someone involved. I've got a connection with some fake meat people actually I just made in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. I don't think I've got one running next week. But yeah, Katie, thank you so much. Keep being amazing. Keep doing what you're doing, and we will catch you soon. See ya.